group. Although I think now we're Charlotte area, SharePoint, Office 365, Flow, Power Automate, Power Apps, Microsoft Teams, Microsoft Dev, SharePoint Online, SharePoint On-Prem, 2013, 2016, 2019. And if you're in 2010, I feel really sorry for you. Time to move. So yeah, we do all of that and then some. First meeting of the new year, so welcome. Those of you who are here in person and those of you who are joining us online. And yes, we do have a whole bunch of people joining us online. I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. I'm not going to take up too much of your time, and then we're going to go right into tonight's presentation. Some of you participated in a very special event back in December. I see some faces here in the room that were actually there. Super SharePoint Saturday. For those of you who were not there, sad that you missed it. It was a one-off event. I don't know that we'll ever be able to pull that off again. We had keynote speaker Jeff Teeper, founder of SharePoint. He came all the way to Charlotte. Bribed with a football game, but came all the way to Charlotte, and we had one heck of a weekend. That was a lot of fun. I don't want to plan 2 SharePoint Saturdays within a small time period like that again, so I think we're only going to give you one this year, unfortunately. So just a couple of things to kind of talk about real quick. Let me skip over that and that. All right, so we're now in 2020. We'll update the logo around that. But this is a volunteer organization. We call on people to volunteer their time, not only to speak, but also to help us organize this. So to all of my co-conspirators out there, we definitely appreciate it. And we've had a few people step up and volunteer to help. We definitely appreciate that. We will loop you in and go from there. We have no budget. So if you know somebody wanting to sponsor, give us money. If it's $50 or if it's $5,000, we'll take it. But we can definitely use the sponsorship. It's not only for, well, I mean, I'll tell you what it's for. It's for the food. It's for running SharePoint Saturday. The biggest cost that we actually have is food. That ends up being about half of our budget every year. But we try to give as much of that back to the community as we can through things like raffles and giveaways, and also trying to put on the best event that we can. So if you know anybody wants to sponsor, they can sponsor SharePoint Saturday. We'll put you on the website as soon as it goes up, probably in the next month or so. But you can also sponsor our monthly meetings. So helps pay for food, things like that. You get to be a spotlight sponsor, give you 15 minutes to talk about whatever you want. And you also get to meet and network with everybody that's here. And then we also do an annual sponsorship where you can sponsor us throughout the entire year leading up to SharePoint Saturday. And we don't limit you from sponsoring one SharePoint Saturday. If you want to sponsor the next 10, okay, we'll work that out too. So we have no budget, and then we have limited resources. Our best resource is one another. We volunteer to speak. We volunteer to help run it. So stepping up to volunteer is big. If you have a topic, and you're unsure about it, come talk to Kelly or Daniel, Corey, Asha, myself, Dan, some of any one of the organizers. We can walk you through it, and if you need help, some of us can volunteer to help. I'm volunteering some of you to to assist with that, but definitely come to us, and we'll let you know. We think it's a valid topic, if it's going to work, and provide some guidance on that. If it's your first time speaking, some of us can definitely help you with that. Some of us get paid to run our mouth for a living. Why? I don't know. But we can definitely give you some pointers and kind of coach you. And I mean, this is where a lot of us got our start. I've spoken user groups going back to college, but my first professional speaking experience was really with the Charlotte group, probably 4 or 5 years ago. From there, I was able to go and speak at other SharePoint community events. Eventually got to speak at SharePoint Saturdays, got invited to speak a couple of smaller regional conferences, and now I'm on kind of the big conference circuit. But it started because speaking in front of this group. So if that's something you're interested in, we're definitely always looking for speakers. But another resource is we need your feedback. We need your, what do you want? What do you want us to talk about? I mean, we can pick topics all day long. I mean, Daniel's going to run Power Apps into the ground. Will's going to do everything you could possibly think of about conditional formatting and more. Corey, Microsoft Teams expert. Kelly, basically Office 365 and everything in between, except for Yammer. He doesn't like Yammer very much. So like, we know what we like, but what do you guys want? Like, we need to know, what are the topics that you're interested in? Is there something that you want us to spend some time on? Do you want 2 topics per meeting? Things like that. Like, we need some feedback. Sometimes it's like talking to a wall. We don't know, we just guess, and we kind of go from there. We also need your help because we have limited resources. Like, if you're not going to be here in person, let us know. Like, go and change your reservation for the event. Just let us know you're going to be remote. That way we don't spend or waste too much money on food. We usually donate the food afterward, but there's been a couple meetings we've had like 40 people signed up and like 15 showed up. And we order based off of what we have in the afternoon. So it definitely helps us if you give us a heads up that you're not going to make it. If you can't make it in person, definitely make it online, but help us grow the community. Let your friends, colleagues, coworkers know, anybody that you think can benefit from learning more, not only about SharePoint, but Office 365. That's a big help as well. So, talk about SharePoint user group. Make sure you emphasize we're not just about SharePoint. We're doing a lot more with Teams, a lot more with the Power Platform. We're basically covering the entire Office 365 suite. So help us spread the word. If you don't mind, we might send you a couple of surveys here to kind of gauge what you want from the monthly meetings, but also what you want from SharePoint Saturday. We've ran it now, 6 times as a group, I think. Charlotte had its very first SharePoint Saturday way back in 2010. It was actually one of the first in the community, which is pretty cool. So it's been going on pretty much ever since then. I think we've, as a organization, we've ran, 2010, so we probably run 10 total at this point, if there's been one every year plus the second one last year. So it's really cool that this group is still here and still going strong. We just want to continue to grow it, and part of that is just letting people know it's not just about SharePoint. We do talk about other things in that Microsoft suite. All right, so let's see, how much time do I got? Another 45 minutes. Okay. Just want to start off the year with a big shout out to a lot of my co-conspirators from last year for basically running 2 SharePoint Saturdays with no downtime in between, but also running the user group. I'm really to blame for us having a second SharePoint Saturday. It was my big mouth that got us into this, and then totally my fault. I woke up the morning after Jeff agreed to it. I told Daniel, who was my roommate at the time, I'm like, yeah, we're doing a second SharePoint Saturday. And then we called Corey and Kelly and told them, and then we spread the word to the rest of the team. But everybody stepped in, jumped in to help us. And even though they're on the slide, Asha and Dan, they definitely were a huge help day of the event, as always. So kind of a big round of applause for all of these people for taking the time to do this. And also thank you to Microsoft Teams for connecting us. Our sponsors were awesome. I'm going to skip over all of that. Well, they're new year. We'll talk about that. All right, so I already mentioned primary focus is not just SharePoint. Audience is pretty diverse. We welcome everybody, whether you're 100 level, 400 level, whether you're end user dev. We try to speak to all audiences. That's why we need to know what you want to see. You're not going to attend every meeting because not everything's going to apply to you. But just let us know what you're interested in and, kind of what you're working on. That kind of lets us know like your skill level, so we know kind of how to fill some of those gaps. Done everything in the middle. SharePoint Saturday 2020. As soon as we get the okay to go ahead and book the venue, we usually try to do it between end of summer semester and fall semester at UNCC Center City campus. Say that 3 times fast. We usually try to do it there. As soon as they give us the open window, we usually go ahead and try to book it. That way the space is locked in and we're able to not worry about the venue, and we can just concentrate on the actual event. But as soon as we get that locked down, we'll post about it. We are going to be using, and let me just show you this real quick. And we'll have some more info on this a little bit later. Sorry, I'm totally hijacking your computer, man.
It's all good.
You're going to want to go to sbsevents.org. This is where all the SharePoint Saturday information is posted. I know we use Meetup, but when you talk about all the different tools that we use, this is going to bring together a couple of them for you. SBS Events is basically the worldwide organization that kind of nonprofit oversees SharePoint Saturday, and they put up our event on their website. The cool thing is when we use this, we're going to be able to tie registration right into it through Eventbrite. So you'll have a click right there. You can register for the SharePoint Saturday event, and you don't have to leave. This is what we're going to try and keep up to date with sessions and agendas and topics and tracks. So this is where you're going to find that information. We'll link to this though once the venue is booked, because then we can actually put in for our site, and it'll be kind of like San Diego's site here. So you can learn more, you can register. That goes to Eventbrite, and then you get your sessions and things at the top. Super easy to work with. You can register if you want. They'll just send you some notifications about upcoming events. That's all they do with it. It's basically a two-person team that works with this. They actually rebuilt this over Christmas break because their provider pulled web support and gave them like 2 weeks notice. So they rebuilt the whole thing. It's pretty slick. I'm a big fan. So big shout out to Susan Lennon, Eric Harlan, Rencor for doing all of that. Last couple of things. Just want to emphasize this one more time. So when that goes live, we'll let you know. So basically, first rule of Charlotte Area SharePoint User Group, we need you to talk about it. Come learn, take what you learn back to your office, whatever. Come network, get some free food with us. When we meet, but we really need you to talk about the user group. Let everybody know, free food. We'll pay you to be here. Let the SharePoint Saturday we do is conference level. Like the people that we bring in, the speakers, they get paid to go and do this at other conferences, and we're bringing it to you for free. And we bring you like 30, 35 tracks. You can't beat that. Bring your whole team. Somebody's going to find something to learn about at that event. When we meet, but just talk to your people about it. These are all the different platforms we're on. The main one that we're using is actually, I don't know why it's not on there, Meetup. That's where you're going to find most of our stuff, Meetup. Get involved with the Yammer group we have, because that's where we post our recordings. We can log you in. It's an external Yammer group. You just have to sign in to get to it. That way we don't get spam. Use the Yammer group. It's a great place to ask questions, but also to find the PowerPoint presentations for some of the topics that we do, but also the video recordings there inside of the Yammer group. And if you have a question, you can just ask it right inside of there. So definitely keep that in mind.
The code samples from this presentation are going to be posted on Yammer after this. You'll definitely want to go out there and download that.
Yeah, so actually Meetup's at the top. I'm an idiot, I can't read. So yeah, Meetup, ksig.org. We do a little bit on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, but the main place to actually find us is Meetup. That's where the main communication is happening. All right, and we don't do the rest of those. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker. This is Will Cooper. He's coming from Winston-Salem. Will spoke at an event with us last year, and we ran into each other at SharePoint Fest in Chicago back in December. Started talking about a couple of things, and he's like, man, I got this really cool thing with column formatting to show you. And I'm like, oh, column formatting, yay, JSON. Said no non-developer ever. So he started showing me a couple of things. I'm like, this is actually really cool stuff. I think that you need to come speak. So he agreed to come. He's going to demystify column formatting and view formatting in SharePoint Online. Emphasis there, SharePoint Online. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to take this back to on-prem. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Will.
All right, awesome intro. Thanks. The SharePoint Saturday stuff is awesome. I'm absolutely blown away by all the speakers and information there, and I'm amazed at what these guys put together. I had come to a SharePoint Saturday event many years ago, and it was on a much smaller scale. Where I'm from in Winston, we don't have anything like that going on, so I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate the opportunity to give back a little bit, but just really cool. I really enjoy being part of this community, so hope you guys feel similar. So tonight we're going to get into formatting. It does have to do with modern pages and modern list views. I'm going to try to run through my deck really fast so we can get to some examples, because that's the really fun stuff. So let me go get started. So just a little bit about me. I've been doing SharePoint development for I guess about 7 or 8 years. I was just a kind of standard Microsoft web developer before that. I'm originally from Iowa. I like classic games like arcade games and stuff like that. That's kind of my nerd thing. And then when I'm not doing computer stuff, I like to do a lot of running around, and I like Spartan races. That's kind of been my big thing in the last year. So I like to have a variety of things. And in that picture, you can see my awesome kids in front of me. I need to update that picture. They're kind of older. That's Josie and Grant. So those are some of the kinds of things I'm about. And there is a SharePoint vendor I do a lot of stuff with. Their name is InfoWise. So if any of you guys know about or happen to do anything with InfoWise Ultimate Forms, I do quite a lot with that vendor. So that's a little bit about me and what I do with SharePoint. Okay, so now to the topic for tonight. As Andy had mentioned, this column formatting that I'm getting ready to show, it uses JSON syntax, which is just basically a way to describe to SharePoint how to render and display data. When you first look at it, it's a bit prickly, and it's not immediately evident what's going on, and there's a lot of nested curly braces and brackets and things like that. So right at kind of your first blush, so to speak, it's not the most palatable experience, but my hope is in the course of showing you and telling you how to kind of get a grip on some of this, that you'll realize that it's not actually that daunting, and it's not actually that hard to work with once you kind of climb in there and you go through certain steps. So hopefully I'll kind of be able to get you over that a little bit as we go through tonight. It does take some practice to get a little bit used to it, and it does become easier with each example you build. So it's all about practice, and that's how you're going to learn. So there's some imperatives, I guess I would say, as far as learning this stuff, and I really hope that you'll take some of the things that I ask you to do to heart, because if you really want to take advantage of this stuff, to me, these are more than suggestions. This is really the way that you're going to take advantage of things that I show you tonight. So I really want you to consider it seriously. So one of those imperatives is you need a sandbox site to practice with this stuff. It's very easy to do that. Just create a new site, and to take advantage of this formatting, these are for modern pages. So that is one thing that's required. But I would almost go so far as to say is you must do this. This is how you're going to learn how to do it. Now, the good thing is that as you do this practice work, these samples, if you will, your practice exercises ultimately become templates. Because everything about this, Andy had hit on this, is it's really a lot about copy and paste. So as with a lot of things with programming these days, when you go about building something, in many cases, you find an existing example and you're going to tweak it. You're going to adjust it to make it your own and turn it into what you want to do. So in no situation ever am I going to sit here and code up one of these examples from scratch. I'm never going to do that. What I'm only ever going to do is find an example that's similar that I built before, and I'm going to adjust it. So try to think about the things that I'm showing as templates and a reference point from which you'll build other things. So a lot of this is about copy and paste as opposed to code from scratch. When you have your sandbox site, you're going to need some dummy data. And I don't know why, but sometimes I feel like people are averse to doing this. But you are going to need some practice lists, and this is because you need something to render. So what we're building is formatting code which tells SharePoint how to render SharePoint list data in a non-boring way, right? I mean, all of us have seen the mundane SharePoint list view dashboards, which are just black and gray, and it's just rows of data. And that gets really boring really fast. So this is all about breaking out of that box and showing something interesting and compelling and different than what people are used to doing. And that's going to build some excitement, build user engagement. And as a developer or creator, or however you want to identify yourself, that's your role here, is you want to make things look nice. As we put in the promo, you want to add some pizzazz. That's what we're shooting for. In your sandbox site, you're going to build practice lists and just populate some dummy records. You don't need many. You maybe need 10 or 12 or something like that. And you are going to use that list data for your practice. So some of the things you're going to see tonight, I have a dummy list for projects, for example. I have things related to dates, stuff like that, a task list. And you can create some of these things on the fly. There's nothing magical about these lists. There's a schedule list, a task list. They're just generic lists that you can create just to begin to build these examples from. So that's going to be a key part of your SharePoint site is you're going to have some practice lists and you can put in some dummy records as you go. You also want to load some dummy documents in there. You can see I just have some images. I put in a PowerPoint, I put in an Excel. So you need some stuff to play around with, some actual content. And this should all be in your sandbox site that you're going to create. So once you have your sandbox site, the process here is that you're going to build views for practice. And then, as I mentioned later on, these are going to become templates from which you can reference. So the point you want to get to is where you've built up this whole library, which would be like the examples I'm showing. And by the way, after the presentation, we're going to post code samples for every single thing you're seeing along with screenshots. So you can download those samples, play around with them, tweak them a little bit, and make it your own sandbox site. Okay, this will be downloadable. You don't have to write this down or anything because you can download these files from Yammer later. These references are critical. These hyperlinks are to the API for column formatting and for view formatting. Basically, those two things are intertwined. Column formatting means that we're formatting the content in a single column, whereas the view formatting means we're taking the content of an entire record and formatting. That'll become a little bit more clear later. But this is actually the full documentation of everything that you're able to do with the API. There are GitHub examples from which I worked. These were all developed by Chris Kent. I don't know him personally, but I'm very much indebted to him because that's really how I figured out how to work on the things that you'll see is by downloading his samples and playing around with them and figuring out what to do. So I'm hoping that you will walk in that same pattern and download not only Chris's examples, but my examples and build up your practice and templates from that. There's also links in here to the fabric icons. We were having a conversation about that before the presentation. And then also some of the Microsoft classes and color names. So what you could do is just bookmark those in your sandbox site. So just make your sandbox site basically your, reference to everything about formatting. And then you can just refer back to the site anytime you need to do anything related. Okay, you may have heard some about SharePoint Framework. I think at least a few folks in this room actually do some SharePoint Framework development. And it is closely related. And you do have the ability to do column formatting and do sophisticated programmatic approaches towards formatting views and columns using SharePoint Framework. That is not what we're talking about today. In general terms, I would tell you that's a steep learning curve and that is very much a developer activity. The things that we're looking at today, in my opinion, are much easier to access because in general terms, we're just copying and pasting a snippet of code to format a column. So just letting you know in case you hear that out there, that is another methodology to format list views or columns, SharePoint Framework. Okay, another imperative. To work on this stuff, if you don't already use it or have it downloaded, go ahead and get Visual Studio Code. It's a lightweight editor that's free, provided by Microsoft. And what you get by using that is it gives you some things like autocomplete and validation. It just makes your editing experience a little bit easier than, Notepad or something of that nature. So I strongly recommend that you edit your code snippets using that tool. And that's what you'll see when I'm screen sharing here in a second. Okay, Chris Kent did make a tool which is a column format editor web part. I've tried it a little bit. As far as the learning experience, I personally, I like the concept. The idea of what Chris was doing is something where through a configuration menu, you basically build the code for you. You can play with it if you want to, but in terms of learning code snippets, I didn't necessarily think that was the best approach, but I just wanted to mention it. It's something additional you can take a look at and try as a part of your learning. Okay, where the code lives. Okay, so I'm going to actually get in the interface and you'll see this in a second, but when you go into the list views, there's the drop down menu under the columns where you normally can do the sorting or edit or whatever. One of the options that you'll see in there now is format this column, and it opens up the right side pane, and then you can drop in the code. So again, there's column formatting and there's view formatting. For column formatting, the formatted code lives in that column, and it will appear in any view where that column's used. And views, it'll be stored with the view. So just want you to know where that goes. So this is what we talked about. This is the pattern. This is how you're going to learn how to do this stuff. Basically, you're going to start by copying an existing example. You're not going to code this stuff from scratch. You just won't. That's just not the way you learn it. Basically, you're going to take a snippet of code. You're going to look and see what's going on with it. You're going to add your own fields into it, and then you're going to tweak it. You'll make a change to the color or something simple like that. And incrementally, by making those adjustments, you'll start to understand how to do that, and you'll adapt your approach. So it's an iterative process, and you walk through and make examples. And this is how you learn to do this. All right, so I'm going to stop yakking about my PowerPoint deck, and we're going to get to the fun stuff, the cool stuff. Okay. All right, here's my sandbox, okay? So I've been tinkering around and messing around and playing around in here for, like a month and a half, just trying all kinds of different things. So right on my dashboard, you can see not the out-of-the-box Microsoft tiles. This is like my own variation on that. On my left panel are just lists of different examples. So we're just going to walk through them one by one, and I'll talk about how these are set up and how they work. Okay, so this is just a SharePoint online tenant, just a standard tenant in my sandbox site. And when you go in the column header, you have this new thing under column settings, which is format this column. So that's how you put the code in. That's all you have to do. When you go in there, it opens up this right panel. And you literally just copy and paste the code in. Okay, so I'm going to actually open up code samples as we're making our way through. Can you guys read the code okay, or should I zoom it in a little more? It's okay? Okay. So hopefully this is a good place to start, because this isn't so daunting, because it's a pretty short code snippet. So as I mentioned, when you look at this JSON code, it's a lot of nested nodes of information and things like this. But as I say, it shouldn't be daunting, because Chris Kent has all these examples. You have all these examples I'm providing after tonight. And really all that you need to do is copy and paste one of those and then play with it, change it, pick a different icon if you want to. In this example, basically what you have are field references. So especially in column formatting, you'll use this @current field reference a lot, and it's just taking the value of the current field. And then it uses an Excel-like syntax. So you're going to see a lot of if statements in there. And so you can do simple checks. And this is how you can tell it to show a different picture depending on a condition, or a different color, or things like that. Under the class references, one of the hyperlinks that in the PowerPoint deck was to some of the standard class conventions that Microsoft uses. So if one concern has to do with following convention and Microsoft branding and those types of things, you'll want to take advantage of that. You'll see in some other code examples that you can actually call out your own style references and things like that, because so you kind of have two ways you can do with that. But this one's quite simple. It's basically saying if this field, this is a yes, no field, and if it's true, I want it to show this icon, otherwise show the other one, and that's the only thing that's going on there. So, you know, this is the way, a good way to get started is just things that are nice and clean and well encapsulated, something you can look at and feel very comfortable and say, yeah, I understand what's going on there. That's a piece of cake. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of walk through. These aren't necessarily in order of, you know, like simple to hard or whatever, but okay, so the concept on this one is to show an icon next to status. Now, in these ones, these are actually from my own icon library, and I did include that in the files you can download later. But I just wanted to enforce the concept that you don't necessarily have to use the Microsoft SVG icons. You can load in your own library and show whatever kind of icons you like. So the way that you're going to get something like that is, of course, with the if statement. So let me pull that up. Okay, so, you know, all of this is static code really just with one exception, right? So we've got, in this case, we're basically referencing to a local library. So I just went into a site assets directory and I just dumped all the icons in there. Did it one time. I can reference these from any of my code views or whatever. I don't ever have to mess with it. It's just my own personal library of icons that I can use in my view. And there we go. Sorry, I had to get the code wrap off of there. Okay, so what we're doing here is basically, you know, this is just like a image source. If any of you guys do a little bit of HTML, you know, you just give it a path to the image. That's really all that we're doing here. It's just that I have this if statement to check this field. So obviously I need to swap this depending on what my choices are, but I'm basically saying, I just pick out what I want, right? If it's not started, I want it to use my symbol called minus. If it's in progress, I want it to be the one that's navigation. So all I had to do is basically just copy and paste in those paths. So all this nested code and curly braces and all this crazy kind of stuff, generally you're not really dealing with it. Really, you're just dealing with this part of it. So if I wanted to replicate and do the same type of thing in some other customer tenant somewhere else, this part that I have highlighted is really the only piece of code. And even from within that, it's just a simple if statement. Yeah, I got to copy and paste in the names of the symbols. That's all it is. I think there's 5 or 6 or 7 different status possibilities. I'm not going to sit here and program all that stuff. I'm going to copy and paste this code and just modify that source, and that's all that I have to do. One comment I'll make on those, I've seen some examples from Chris where he does this ultra nested if condition, where it's checking is if it's, you know, if the field value is this, no, then check this inside of that. And I really can't stand those because they get very confusing to me. And then you end up with this like close, brace, 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 you know, 6 levels deep. The way that you see it here to me is a lot easier because it's basically just appending, but if the condition check's not true, it's just blank, blank, blank until it finds its true condition. So if you ever happen to see those in any code example where it's a bunch of nested if statements, it's probably not necessary. You can probably do something like this instead. Okay, let's go on to the next one. I'm gonna try to move a little quicker. I'll pick up the pace because I have a lot of examples to show you. Okay, when you, I don't know if you guys know this, but when you load documents or images into SharePoint, behind the scenes, the platform is automatically creating thumbnail images and preview images for you in different sizes automatically. And you can reference to those with the code view. So for example, in this PowerPoint one, if I click on this, it actually is taking an image of that and then making a small thumbnail for me. So, this doesn't even need a conditional block or anything. I'm just referencing something that's already in there. So there's no if statement in this. Really, the magic all just happens in this one little snippet of code, this @thumbnail medium. And what's cool about this is I don't just have to take what's out of the box, right? I've got the style references. I can put in my own CSS, and I happen to personally like it 50 pixel. Well, maybe you think I'm dumb and you want something that's bigger. You're like, I can't see that. I want 100 pixel. Because you're doing this formatting yourself, you can tweak that and you can control it according to your taste or the feedback you're getting from your users instead of throwing up your hands and saying, well, that's just SharePoint. That's what I get, just being along for the ride. You're really explicitly taking control over how this stuff is going to appear in the list views, which to me is fantastic because you can really get it to look just exactly how you want. All right. Oh, this is a big one. You may not think it's a big one. It's a big deal to me. Okay. And who likes the little edit button and list views? The little notepad thing in the first column. Oh God, I love that. Because I personally I don't really like the display option. I just want to go right to the edit form, and that's where I want my users to go also. Well, guess what? Modern SharePoint views and stuff like that, there's no edit button or anything like that, which kind of drives me insane. I'm not really sure the rationale behind that. But in any case, it doesn't matter. You can make your own. Okay, so, and again, if you think mine looks ugly, you're not going to hurt my feelings at all because you can make it look exactly the way that you want. Okay, if you click on this button, it's going to take me to the edit. So basically, I've restored the edit button function, which is non-existent otherwise. So I can click on this and it'll take me right into the edit form and I can, do whatever I want. And it's got a little hover effect or whatever. I can make the button look however I want. But the cool thing is I've restored the edit button, which is otherwise not available. Okay, so in the API, you'll see there are different things. There's like a default action click. There's the edit properties. I don't know how many there are. There's maybe 10 different things you can do, but in the API, it tells you all those different possibilities. Flow is one of them. We're coming up on that real soon. This one, we're just using, there's this property called custom row action, and we just give it edit props. And then I do a bunch of styling. Really all this is just giving the JSON code some CSS references and telling it how to look when you hover over it and stuff like that. Really all that's going on is I give this element type. One of the options is button, and I tell it what to do. I say, go ahead and do edit properties for the record. That's all there is to it. And then a bunch of styling just to kind of make it look pretty or however you want to make it look. And that's the code. You don't have to worry about any nested anything. You could just go in here and change a couple lines if you want to make that crazy green hover go away. Not hard to work with at all, I promise you. Okay, so that's an edit button. And I don't claim intellectual property of any of this whatsoever. I'd say probably half or more of these things are stuff I just took right from Chris Kent's examples. But then I riffed off of that and came up with other concepts. And just as he figured out things I never would have discovered, I figured out some things that he doesn't have in there. And that's what this is all about. My hope is, as you play with this, you're going to have that same experience. You're going to go through these examples and you're going to get to this point of confidence. You're going to get over the hump and you're going to have this epiphany. You're going to be like, oh, I have this cool idea. It's basically whatever you can imagine your data looking like. Any kind of concept you can come up with, you really should be able to make it happen with this. So these are really just kind of idea generators, and hopefully it'll kick you off and help you think of something else. So this is like a rating system, like a 5-star rating system. So it just takes a column that would just have like a 1 through 5 and stored in it and just renders them out as stars. And obviously those icons could be anything. You could have fun and turn that into something else. So it's going to be if checks, right? you're going to see a lot of those. Basically, we got to check the value of the field and show. In this case, we're evaluating based on how many are in there. So this code runs a little longer. Anytime you see the code running longer, in most cases, those sections are really just copy and paste. They're nearly identical to each other. In this case, we want to know, is it more than one? Is it more than two? Is it more than three? So that's kind of what's going on there. Our icon reference is favorite star or favorite star fill. Let me show you where those references are coming from. I mentioned those icons earlier. These are the fabric icons. So if you ever want to, when you're trying to find those, you can just go to this page. It's in my PowerPoint deck. And if you hover over this, it tells me what the name of it is. So I don't pass any path to a locally stored image or anything like that. All I have to do is give it that name. And there's a gazillion of these things in here. So if I want to show, like I don't know, let's say a printer. There you go. See how it like immediately shows one? And then I just hover over it and I just need this code snippet. So I'd say, okay, that's print fax printer file. And I just type it in that thing and bam, it'll just show up in the view. That's all that I have to do. I don't have to go download some giant library of icons or anything. This is all just baked right into SharePoint Online. All right. Let's go to the next one. Oh, this is the fun one. Okay, who in here is using Power Automate? Oh. Who does flows? All right, there we go. In Power Automate. Okay. This is fun. You can actually reference to that. So I put in a format for each of those. So I can actually click from the list view. It opens up the side panel and you just press in the, pass in the ID of the flow, which you've generated. And then I just click run. And if it's cooperative, you're going to see this change to green. I really like that you don't have to do a page refresh. Isn't that awesome? I'm so used to hitting like F5 over and over again in SharePoint when I'm working on stuff. And I just love it now how you can just sit there and it's like bubbling and then all of a sudden it just updates on it. I think that's really cool. But you see how this works? Like this is like a simple button I can use to change status from the dashboard. So without even having to go into the form view, kind of a cool thing to do. The flow for doing that obviously is very simple, right? It's basically a couple of command blocks because you're just updating the status to that. So that's kind of cool. All right. Yep. All right. So there's something I don't like about this. Does anybody have a guess about what I don't like about this view? Got 5 buttons there. So with all these things, we kind of have an issue with real estate, right? You only have so much room on the screen, right? So I'm kind of like stretching across the screen and there's probably other stuff I want to show, but I don't want people to have to like scroll and scroll. Okay, so what if I didn't have to like stretch it across like that? Boom, there you go. Okay, so those are kind of like Easter colors. Okay, don't anybody like throw rocks at me because my colors are atrocious. I'm sorry. I'm gonna make Microsoft partly take the blame for this because they limit the colors in their classes. If you go on the reference, you'll see. I'm not gonna like go down that rabbit hole too much, but I didn't pick these colors because I thought that was like super awesome looking. But anyways, okay, so this is the same thing I just showed you, but now I've got it like nice and packed in on one column because there's probably other columns I want to show, right? So this does exactly the same thing. I just consolidated those flow triggers down into one column. So it's identical. It's just that I've got it nice and packed in for me, which gives me space to do other things that I want to do. Go to on hold. It's working on it. Supposedly. There he goes. Okay, so they're stacked up. It's really just the same code reference. It's just that it's consolidated down into one. So I'll show you that. Basically, when you make a flow, it gives you like a GUID or whatever you want to call it. It gives you a unique ID for the flow, and you drop that in. So in my code sample, you'll see a little thing that says insert your flow ID here. So you heard me earlier mention this thing called custom row action. So one of those is execute flow. And you just give it that and the element type's a button. So when you click on that, it knows to pop open the side panel. And what's cool is you can actually customize the header text and the button text. So you can actually, kind of personalize what actually shows in the side panel too. So this could be anything. It could be like send an email, request for approval or something. It's whatever you want to trigger from your flow that you made. It could be anything that you want to dream up, but you're putting it right in the user. Instead of it having sort of buried in the form where they might not know it's there, you're kind of putting it front and center, right? It's in the list view. It's like attention grabbing. All right. So does this look like standard SharePoint list to you? A little different, right? Okay, laid icons. That's a big one. A lot of automation and project tracking and things like that. You're trying to make sure things don't fall through the cracks, right? And so that's a lot of dashboards, right? If something's late or priority or something, you want it to stand out, you want it to grab people's attention. So this one there is a dynamic now parameter where you can run date checks against that. So if you had a due date on something, you can change how it looks. So this is pretty simple concept. Basically it's a red flag after you pass today, but it's dynamic. So it'll always change as the dates change. Okay, let me go to that. This is a really easy one. Now I use my own icon, so I just said, insert your path to wherever your icons. You could use the Microsoft icons, that's fine. And just like the other ones, we just have a check, right? So what I'm doing is the current field less than or equal to now, then show me this flag, otherwise show me the green flag. So you see these if blocks popping up over and over again. So that's a lot of how it's done. Okay, here's a fun one. Okay, this one's actually calling a Google Maps API. You do have to get an API key in order to take advantage of that. And it's keying off this address field. That is one key concept I want to make sure you understand. When you do the column formatting, you can reference to any of the fields in the view. It's not necessarily formatting based on the value of just the column that you're in. So if I'm in column Z, I can reference and show information based on any of the column values in that record. So this just passes that address to the Google Maps API. As you might expect, if I click on that, it would take me up to the full map view, and it changes real time. Here, let's change one just for fun. All right, so this one's that address. Let's change it to Charlotte. Now you see 1,000 fields in here because when you're sandboxing, this is kind of what happens. You have to have lots of fields to try all these different column formatting. So this could either be a street address or city, state, or whatever. It's pretty flexible to just kind of take whatever you give it. See how that changed immediately? Okay, so that's maps. I'm not going to go into code. What's that? Go ahead.
Just a question. Whoa.
It's not in this example. It's just taking straight text value. It could be that you could. you probably could do something like that. So I'll confess I'm not savvy on the location column that you're referencing, but there's probably a mechanism where you could dynamically extract information out of the location column to like a calculated field. I should have mentioned that you can and should use calculated fields to get data the way that you want, because a lot of this is you have to pass data a certain way, especially in this kind of example. So there may be some middle step needed, Andy. That's my guess. But this is anticipating it as just that text value. That's what it passes into the URL. Okay, so all right, there's map. Okay, this is more using the Microsoft ones instead of the ones from my local icon library. I'm not going to drag you through the code on every one of these because it will get a little bit boring. Okay, so I didn't mention this before, but I think this is actually what started me down the rabbit hole. Is I think maybe 6 months ago, roughly, I was in a list view or something, and I just arbitrarily noticed the format this column pop up, and then it suggested something to me, and it showed that. And I think there was the option to use JSON code before that, but it kind of opened my eyes to the possibilities. There are some examples, like a choice field or a date field. There's a few examples where Microsoft will kind of hold your hand, so to speak, and just give you something automatically, which is nice. I'm glad they did that. So it will suggest to you in some examples. So that's something you can take advantage of immediately without having to use any coding whatsoever. So it'll recognize, just based on the type of column you're using, if you have that type of situation, it'll propose that to you. So if you go in here, it gives you like a nice user-friendly interface and that type of thing. So there's a handful of ones like that. So these bars are an example of that, where it'll take quantitative data and it can give you bars. And it'll let you pick colors, and that's nice. The downside to this is it's somewhat limited. You basically have to take what they give you from that. You can work from their code. You can get to the code behind from this if you want to play with it. I don't necessarily recommend that approach because their code behind is a bit nasty. I'm just showing you these ones that say OOB. These are all out of the box. So if you have a choice column, if you just want to do quick color formats in the background because you don't have any time, you need to do something in 5 seconds, then by all means, go for it. It's better than just black and white, in my opinion. A couple more examples for dates. This one's using out of the box where it's checking for today instead of the explicit one I did before where I shown icons. There's another progress bar style one. So those ones, they just give you automatically. It'll suggest it to you. So that's something you could try. All right, almost to the end of column formatting. Then we're going to get to the really crazy, awesome, insane view formatting stuff. This one's kind of cool. This just takes a background color and then uses the border radius element on CSS to turn it into a circle. So kind of a funny way to do this. But if you like flags that are just circles, this doesn't even need an icon. So this doesn't need to reference an image or anything. You can just render that with straight CSS. I will show you that one. That's because that's kind of easy to do and it's fun. All the magic just happens with that border radius. So it just, usually you'd have like a square element, it would just curve the corners on a div, but it just makes this little div a circle. And then, you know, as is in the case in almost all these, then you've got this if block going on where this is actually an example, a simple example of what I was kind of trying to say to avoid. Do you guys see how there's like the nested ifs going on in this case? Okay, well this isn't bad, right? Because it goes 3 levels deep. But you can imagine if you have 6 or 7 options, how that gets brutally awful to read. So this absolutely could be done more like I showed earlier, where you just do the check and do like a plus to append to the string and just move through them. That'd be a better way to do that. But this is sort of like an example of what to maybe kind of stay away from, nesting the ifs within each other. You should not have to do that. Okay. But basically what we're doing here is this is like a priority flag where it's 1, 2, or 3 in the column value, and it's changing the color depending on what that is. Okay. All right. Oh, this one's fun. I 100% did not come up with this. I don't claim any credit. This is actually drawing a pie chart using SVG commands. So SVG, for anybody who doesn't know what that is, it's scalable vector graphics. The general concept is that through a series of instructions, it's telling the computer how to draw an image based on quantitative information, based on instructions that you give it. I almost like laugh out loud when I look at the code for this because it's so beyond my knowledge, but this is one of Chris Kent's examples, and it's cool. I think it's cool, don't get me wrong, but the point of it is it kind of teaches me, okay, this is not something I want to mess around with. If you look in here, it's got like 2 times the value of pi using the sine function, you know, cosine down here. I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't have the faintest clue what's going on in there. Okay, the only thing I would claim is if I wanted to change the color, I'd come up to the class function and I could change that. Like, yeah, I got that down pretty good. But you know, this is limited. Even the Brainiac, whether it was Chris or somebody else came up with them, if I came back and I'm like, okay, I want you to do a pie chart with more sections, it would kill him. I guarantee you. He was able to like barely, through a lot of wang jangling, get that like pie chart with one quantitative component. But if you had to like put in another pie section, it would get like an order of magnitude nastier. So point being, this is cool, but not the way to get a pie chart going. Not something you would want to tangle with. Okay, but you're gonna see a cool option where you can do that kind of thing. Okay, Tilde. Okay, that's an important concept. Okay, so this one does some math to figure out like when you're coming up on a due date, or how many days are left, or how many days are overdue. This is one of these funny things where it seems like it should be pretty easy, but it's a little funky when you actually look at the code. So I'll show that to you. It's a bit funny what you have to do, but it works consistently and it's fine, but it's a bit odd. You got to do some date math. So in SharePoint, it's kind of storing information on this date timestamp in terms of seconds. So you end up with this really insane thing where you're dividing by whatever that gigantic number is, like 86,400,000. Okay, all you really have to know is I'm helping it to convert it to days instead of seconds. And it does some math to give you a to get a difference on that. So it checks the date on there, compares it to this dynamic now parameter, which is rendered on the fly, and you know, based on that, we'll get our quantity of days, and then we're going to do some shading depending on whether we're overdue or whether that due date's off in the future. But again, it really, the complexity is only lying in a couple lines of this code. So that's the key thing. Never, ever am I going to have to like go up through this stuff and do that. There's one thing on here I want to call out. This is not a part of the API or syntax in the JSON or anything. But for those of you guys who do little light programming or anything like that, you may want to have some kind of comment or some kind of note to yourself if it's something you use a lot. That underscore comment means nothing. It could say underscore anything. It's just not going to be interpreted, or nothing is going to happen in it. But it is a mechanism where if you're the kind of person who likes to have some notes about what you like to do with this or how you're going to reuse it, that's a way to put sort of like a code comment. in your JSON if you want to. So if you see something like that, that's what that is. You don't have to use those, but it's a way for you. You do need to include it right in that section, though. You can't just throw that anywhere arbitrarily in the code. If you like something in the header that describes what that is, that's something you could do. All right. All right, so just like the flow actions, we could have a real estate issue, right? If I'm doing all my fancy formatted columns and all of a sudden, pretty much I'm all of a sudden running right off the right side of the page, right? I'm running out of real estate very fast. If you have more than one kind of progress bar, something like that, you could have an issue with that. I don't have the luxury of being able to put all these bars right next to each other, because in no time flat, I'm right off the edge of the page. So this one consolidates the bars just like the flow action and stacks them up vertically, right? So you could have some kind of tracking list where there's 3 key fields of quantitative information that you want to track, and this lets you consolidate it down so you can pack things in a little tighter, neater. I won't go to the code for that, but you could imagine how that works. Basically you just have to put in your field references. That's really all that you're doing in many cases, is you're just swapping in the field references only, and you're going to copy and paste and reuse the code. Maybe you want to make a tweak. Maybe you want that color to be slightly different. You can see where the colors are in there. They're either spelled out gray or there's some hex value. It's easy to find the code, and you just swap in whatever you want. All right. So finally, I keep promising you I'll get to view formatting, and I finally get to view formatting. Okay. Okay, the simplest of all view formats. Okay, this is something you do in Excel, right? Alternate shaded rows, right? This is like a great example of something that helps this list stand out and look not like every other one of 1,000 other lists in SharePoint, to just get people's attention a little bit. You could probably do it a little bit more subtle than I did it there. And it takes you almost nothing to do this. There's so little effort just to make things just look a little more polished. And this is a great example where, it isn't inherently nasty JSON coding or whatever. This is one line of code that just checks a row index, and you just give it some class references. And that's all that you had to do to make this look much better, much less boring to look at. Yeah. Sure. Okay. So if you remember, do you guys remember the picture of the cave in my PowerPoint deck where the code lives? Okay. So when I do column formatting, the way that I get that into SharePoint is I go to that column header. Do you remember I was in the context menu and there was a format this column option? You guys remember that? You want me to go in there one more time? So if I wanted to format the status column, I go to column settings and I pick format this column. Okay, that's where the column formatting code lives. And there's this advanced mode. So if I wanted to do that, these code snippets I'm showing you, I'd paste it in there, and that information is saved. Just like if you went into list settings and you set the properties of a column that you're creating, that JSON formatting code is stored in that specific field, only in that column. That's where it lives. The view formatting, on the other hand, is instead telling you how to do the whole record. So if you go into the view menu, there's a very similar option, which is oh, okay. I was like, it's somewhere in here. Okay. There, it's the very bottom. Okay, so that's the view version of it. The difference there is that you're telling it how to render out the whole record. It's going to be a little more clear as I get into more view examples, but column is only about that one column, which actually is really important because you cannot make the column wider with the controls that they have set up in the list views. It will not get wider than, I think, like 125 pixels or something, no matter what I do in the styles, no matter what kind of black magic I try to put in there, you are locked in, and that can be very frustrating. View formatting, you completely break out of that box and you can make things as wide as you want to. Okay. Negative. Okay, so you're going to see examples. You basically, when you're doing view formatting, like the column formatting just goes right out the window. Like you're just taking it to another level, if you want to think of it that way. Because now I'm giving it a whole set of instructions on how to render the entire list record. So you'll see how that is. So if I'm doing view formatting, I paste the code in this way. Okay. All right, this is going to get kind of funny. Okay, so this is probably be what your experience might be like. As I'm going through these examples, you figure things out as you're going along, and invariably what's going to happen is at some point you're going to do something a way that's really hard, but you'll pull it off, and then later down the road you're going to have a eureka moment, and you're going to figure out a lot easier way to do that. Okay, so this is cool. It's cool to me. I've rendered out a bar chart just based on SharePoint list record. I didn't have to go into Power BI. I didn't have to go through the 17 steps to create that and sort it and get it to show the right way and then publish it out and filter and make the settings and make it dynamically refresh and spend 15 minutes doing that. I just pasted in some code and referenced that in there. Now, the problem for me was the formatting code for this got nasty, as you might think. It was long and cryptic. Now, yeah, theoretically, I can reuse this so long as I have this data set up in this exact format I have here, which is like January, February, March, April. You know, if it's like that, yeah, I can rinse and repeat. But I'll show you what the code looked like. Not the most pleasant experience trying to code this one up. All right, let's see how bad we did. See the preview pane on the right side? Not yet, not yet. I have another way I'm going to show you. Okay, so now I will tell you a lot of that is copy and paste for each of the months, but there is a lesson to be learned. I don't regret going through that experience because you learn through pain, right? You learn through the struggle. We all do. That's how you really get it. And so when I found another easier way to deal with this, it was like, yes, okay, like, you know, that you have to go through the struggle for it to study. Okay, anyways, that's the bar chart. Yeah, that was tough. Okay. All right, let me close that. So don't do that one. That code sample's in there. Not an example of something that you're going to want to do. Okay. Color cards. Okay. Who in here uses Google Keep? The little sticky note kind of thing? I love Google Keep. So cool. This was just sort of like my practice to try and replicate that a little bit. So that's kind of what I was going for here. Now with this, I have a drop-down picker that I put into the list where the user can select the color for it. Then it shows the category and the description on the top. So notice that we're no longer doing columns, right? SharePoint columns are out the window. There's no column headers. There's no sorting, none of that. I'm just rendering out these div blocks with content from my SharePoint list. So I've just basically sort of busted completely out of the SharePoint list view rendering system, and I've taken total control, and I'm making it just show me div blocks with whatever I want to come up with now. All right, let's see. Those are color cards. I'll show you what it code for this is not as bad. You already saw the worst code that you would ever have to do. Sorry, I'm running long on time. Okay, we're getting through it. I'd save the sexy stuff for last. All right, so here's how the cards are. Okay, now when you start to get into views, you do have this concept of children. Okay, who in here has like some general like comfort with doing HTML and divs and stuff like that? All right. Well, all you're really doing here in the JSON is using a different syntax. You're telling the server how to render out those divs. So basically, kind of whatever you could dream up. If you like to fiddle around with like some divs and some HTML, that's what you're doing is setting that up. So in these types of things, you're going to see these children elements, and this is where the nesting kind of goes down different levels. And what it's doing here is creating some nested divs for me, and I'm indirectly rendering some HTML and then dropping in the field values. Same kind of syntax and rules like we were doing with the other stuff. I made a field here. You see it says card color. That's what's controlling the color of that div. And then it's dropping in the content. So in terms of basic approach and syntax, it's using the same things that we're using with the column formatting. It's all the same type of thing going on. All right. All right, here's the column chart. This is the same ugliness and nasty headache of what I was doing with the bar chart. So looks kind of cool. If it just interests you and you want to play around with it, you can take a look, but kind of an example of something that you don't want to tangle with. Icon cards. So come on. Okay. So you can see, you can just take text content, just as if I was doing a web page. I can make it show up in blocks, left to right, top to bottom. I can put it in the grid, make it show up however I want to. These are just different examples of doing that. Okay. All right. I promised you some awesome stuff. Okay. So I'm into charting. I like doing charting, but what I'm not into is having to do a whole bunch of steps just to get a basic chart going. So as a developer and somebody who does consulting and works with a lot of different businesses, you know, my customers, they like to see things like this. What they're not necessarily interested in doing is having me spend 2 hours of their time and money working on charts like this. They've got higher priorities to take care of them. For this, it's always low on their priority list. At the same time, I know they're going to like this kind of stuff. So I want to be able to get charts for them, but I need to be able to do it pretty fast and easy. So that's what I'm, as a developer or consultant or whatever you want to say, I'm looking for opportunities or options where I can get chart and visual data pretty fast. I need to move quickly because I'm not really a lot of the time to do things like go into Power BI and go through those steps. Okay. There is a, I'll have it, it's in the PowerPoint deck, and I'll show you in a second. And anybody in here used chart.js? It's like an open source charting JavaScript library. Okay, well, you can look it up later on, but this technique, there's another site called Quick Charts, and it uses chart.js to render chart images. So in this case, it's not using JavaScript to render out the chart. It is indirectly. There's another server doing that and capturing it as an image and rendering it back. All I have to do is have an image source, and I pass the attributes from this. So I'm going to show you this code sample. What I want you to pay super close attention to is I want you to look at how much code I have going on with this compared to the big, ugly, nasty thing I showed you where I was scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. All happens just with this one thing. Now I do have some styles for the div block around the top and the title, but basically everything happens right there. So what I've got going on is I'm just passing in. You see January, February, March, April. Those are the labels. And then these cache references are the fields. So you can look up the site. As long as you're not rendering more than 120 charts a second from your server, it remains free to use. So I really don't think you run into any problems there. But even as this data changes, that will render back a different image to me. So it's a very similar concept to the Google Map API you saw earlier. Same type of thing. You pass a reference through that image and it renders back an image for you and it shows up in the view. So you can tell that I was cutting cartwheels. We've got 47 lines of code compared to, I think it was like 600 and something lines of code where I was explicitly rendering out every block on the bar chart. And you can change the colors, you can change the labels, you can use anything in that chart API. So if you like this as a method to do charts, you could become a chart.js ninja and you can do this stuff really easily and accessibly. So compared to Power BI, this is kind of, for me, a new fast way to get a chart out. I could do this a lot faster than that. Not appropriate for all situations, but I'm just talking about a fast chart option where I want to render visualization of data and do it quickly and be on my way. Say again? It's from a SharePoint list. So in this case, this is what's in the list, okay? That does point to kind of a key aspect about charts. This is true no matter what charting platform you're using. You have to set up your data in order for the chart to consume it. Now, usually when you're doing something like this, the axis would be reversed. Now, Power Automate can be useful for this purpose because usually what's happening is you have to aggregate data. You know, I'm not going to be charting based on a list record with, or excuse me, a list with 4,000 records into it. I need a middle step, right? I need to run some kind of process, Power Automate, to do a summary calculations on that and compile it and put it in a middle list, which is my summary data. That's the data I'm going to do my charting off of. So that's kind of a key concept. Okay. So they've got all kinds of charts too, things that I couldn't even pull off. Remember we talked about pie charts earlier? Okay, so there's the bar. The code behind for columns is literally, I think, chart type, changing it from column to bar or something just that simple. You can do line chart. Okay, now this next one's a little more special. I want to do multi-lines, right? You have to do, I was talking about kind of having a middle step. I'm going to talk to you about how to do that. So, okay, I guarantee you nobody else has like rendered out view formatting with a multi-line chart like that before. Like this stuff is crazy. Like that you're able to do charting. Like we're repurposing this in a direction that probably like people would not normally think of. Okay, so this is based on help desk tickets. I have this concept in my sandbox I made of like a help desk system. So this is, the cool thing about this chart you're seeing is like this is a real-time dashboard. Like these metrics are changing every day. And this could be like a featured view on a dashboard. It looks really cool and it's dynamic. It's not a static chart. I don't have to refresh it or update. This is all happening on the fly dynamically without me ever having to touch it again. In order to set something like this up, you kind of have to do something a little bit special. Okay, so I have this other list, which is just consolidation of like the number of help tickets. And what I need is to pass a comma delimited series of data to that. Okay, so it's just for this particular special chart, but basically, you know, remember with the view formatting, it's per list record, right? I cannot render out a chart from this based on a long SharePoint list because all I'm telling SharePoint is what to do with one record of data. So if I'm going to do something like a multi-line chart, I'm basically smashing that down and I have to give it that comma limited series. So how do I pull that off? You're probably wondering. Okay, basically you have to have a flow in Power Automate to loop through your source list and then basically write to a string and then write it back here. So that one's a little tricky. takes a little more knowledge, a little more practice, but the possibilities there. You have the code sample, and it can be done, and it looks awesome once you have it set up. So you may have to do a little more hard work for that one, but once it's in there, that could be a huge value add. Okay, here's the pie. I promised the pie. Here's the pie. Here you go. No way at all to pull that off through regular view formatting whatsoever. You only could pull that off through calling quick charts to call for the pie chart. Impossible through SVG. There's no way. All right. Here's a better example of map links. So I talked about how your column widths are like blocked in. You cannot expand those. You're trapped. Okay. With the view formatting, you can make those div blocks as wide as you want. I could have these stretch across the entire page. So can you see how this one maybe makes a little more sense? If that map data was critical and I wanted people to actually see it, not just have this like tiny little sliver, this would be a lot better, right? And then I've got some divs in there, and I've got a little edit button. So now I'm actually kind of rendering the data in a way that's a lot easier to see. So this to me is a much better example of using the Maps API, because now I have something I can actually look at. It's a little bit more meaningful as a dashboard. All right. Okay, I call this promoted links because it's basically recreating the way promoted links were in classic SharePoint pages, the way you could format them. So there's a distinction here. If you use the quick links web part, which is super awesome and I love it, but you're very locked down in terms of the colors and branding in modern SharePoint sites, and they kind of like lock you down in the color. They're not going to let you pick the color per quick links tile. No option to do that. They give you the color, and that's just what you're going to take. If you wanted to take control and have your own thing, using this formatting code, you could instead use this to render it if you wanted to do that. You know, I'm not a branding person. I'm not going to get into a dispute with you about that. But if you want to have more explicit control, this is a way you can pull that off. So that's like a way to use it for navigation. Okay, and here's just another example. This is using a path to the image and some links for that. Okay, I've thrown a gazillion examples at you. Let me go back to a couple of things, and then we'll just go to discussion and questions and things like that. Image charts, I just want to mention, because those are really cool if you do get into that. They are static images, so there's no hover effects or anything like that. It's literally rendering back a JPEG image of the chart from what it came up with. It's dynamic. The server is going to render the image for you, but you have no hover effects or anything like that. Yeah, you have to have less than 120 requests per minute. That's 2 per second. So probably, hopefully, for most of you guys, that's not going to be much of a problem. But they do have a paid API. You can look that up, and I'm sure it's not expensive. In fact, I'm certain it's not. It's some low charge per month if you are in a big organization and it was used heavily. I did have some kind of issue. It passing that string with any spaces or hyphens seems to break it for some reason. Probably that can be overcome. I didn't quite figure that out. For the time being, I just usually use an underscore or a period between that. Just something to watch out. If you try to do that, you don't see the chart pop up on the page. Just make sure there's none of that in there. You know, to me, that's a minor thing to give up to be able to have a free service like that, and other special characters. So just make sure you kind of start out plain vanilla when you do your chart before you put stuff in. That way you're not wondering why it doesn't work, that kind of thing. So those image charts, again, the reference is chart.js is the actual technology, the scripting that renders those charts. It's an open source charting. And you can look in their API that tells you how to pass those parameters. Quick chart is a site that actually is the server that compiles and renders those images and serves them back to your page. So that's what you need to know for those. All right, so I've thrown a million examples out there at you. If you go in, every single last one of the things I showed you, there is a screenshot and code for every one of those. None of those will work or do anything for you whatsoever until you build a sandbox site and build dummy data and lists. You have to do this. You're not going to get anywhere until you do that. I love this stuff. It's cool. There's a million other things I'm sure you could come up with this. I mean, it's really the only limit is your imagination. There's nothing I hate worse than just boring, plain vanilla SharePoint list view pages with no customization whatsoever. I can't stand that. You can see there's a ton of options. I don't think everything has to look like, Easter and crazy colors or anything. Believe me, I don't do that, but just a little bit of customization formatting can go a long way and, really makes people happy. So I definitely think this should be part of your recipe, if you will. This is so much better than it used to be. And classic pages, the way I would have pulled this stuff off is with using like the script, adding a script in the page and using jQuery and CSS and stuff like that. Way more involved, way more easy to break. Not a good way to do things, totally unsupported, whereas this is completely within the convention of and what Microsoft is providing and wanting you to do. So this is a really great way to do that. So I think this stuff is awesome. So any questions or comments that you guys have doing that? I will tell you, I brought a bunch of giant mouse pads / doormats. They're huge. You can have one of those, but only if you ask me a question or make a comment. Yes, sir. Good question. To my knowledge, it's okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. The question was, how often is the API updated for column formatting and view formatting? I don't have an authoritative answer to that, but just from my experience referencing the pages, I would tell you that it's not changing very much right now. But to be honest, I personally don't think they will need to change much. I say that because I don't see a lot that's missing. I guess I would put it that way. They may make some tweaks to it, but I don't think there would be any code breaking updates. Let me answer it this way. I would be extremely surprised if they made an update to that API that would be what I would call breaking to those. I absolutely expect all the examples I showed, which you can download, I expect all those would work totally reliably over the course of the next year, no problem at all. If anything, what they probably would do is they might add features. If you remember, there's like actions, different type of actions. They could potentially add something to that. I don't know. They might add colors or some other thing, but pretty stable. I'd say that should be a low concern. I wouldn't worry about that too much. All right, that was a good question. What else we got? What are you guys going to build? Somebody tell me that they got an idea of something I want to build. What are you going to make? You're shaking your head. Yes. What are you going to make? That's super crazy, man. Okay, the comment was that they're going to add a edit button. I hate that. So on a modern page, when you add the list view web part now, not only is there no edit button, there's no edit button on the top menu. I don't know why. It drives me insane. I can't stand having to click on the record, go to the view form, and then click on edit to get that. I absolutely can't stand that. So that's a really good comment. So now you can just drop one in. And by the way, all you need, this seems a little weird, but basically all you'll do is just make a simple plain vanilla text column, and you can call it whatever you want. You can call the column like edit or something. I don't know if that's a reserve word. I think Microsoft, I think it lets you do that. But in any case, the column will hold no information. It's just merely a container for the code. But yeah, that one drives me insane. I think I'm going to use that one a lot too. Mhm. Like vertically? Okay, so I think you're referencing, the question was when it comes to stacking, is there a limit to the amount of space that you can use? Vertically, you're not limited on space at all. And I just want to draw a distinction. It's the column formatting where you're locked with width, but vertically that can go as long as you need to. Okay, you might be thinking of like the multi-line text part now. They do this thing where it sort of like fades out. I don't know if people have seen that. But when you make your own formatting, it doesn't do that at all. But I do want to just call out the fact that with view formatting, it's not limited on width or height. So as you get in and practice these examples, I think you'll tend to agree with me that kind of the big opportunity, if you will, really is more with the view formatting. That's where you can get crazy and make these nested containers and basically draw a box with whatever kind of components and kind of bring a whole bunch of things together however you want, instead of being kind of like locked into your narrow column. All right, what else are you going to build? I want to hear like ideas about like cool stuff that you want to make. Like, what do you want to show? What do you want to visualize? it renders immediately. I'd say that's very much in the corner. Image rendering would not, because you're relying on another server. But I would those particular cases, you know, those are really kind of like on the boundaries of how this stuff is used. But all the stuff that's calling directly from SharePoint stuff, I mean, you have to keep in mind there's no script involved, right? And I mentioned in the past I would have had to try to do this with jQuery. Like there'd be some load where there actually is some stuff that has to do in the rendering. You're just giving it formatting code. To me, I've never seen any delay at all. This stuff is just there really fast. Oh, you're like, if it's a really long list, but not in a view, not on that page. It's just rendering it like as like, okay, no, no. Right. All right. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to like show me this nightmare scenario you're describing. I have in all my practice like never yet seen any slow anything with this. Like that is a major point in the win column for this that I've seen, because scripting's right out the window. There's no JavaScript or anything. You're merely giving it formatting instructions. In some sense, you could equate this to CSS, right? You're just merely giving it colors and references of icons. I mean, it renders it just immediate. So you could be right. I haven't like had these like outer boundary limits yet, but the performance in terms of rendering is awesome. It's one of the best parts about it. It should. I haven't done a lot of testing. Good point. My chips would be on yes. Although if you're a mobile app, you know, obviously limited screen real estate on that. Probably you want to do, you're thinking about more of the column formatting with that. Yeah, it should be fine. I haven't messed around to like do all my checks, but after, that's something I'm going to check now that after you mentioned it. That's a good point. But with modern pages in general, it's all set up to work uniformly. So I think that would work fine. Obviously, I'm doing my like giant boxes with maps and stuff like that. It'll render on that mobile phone, but you know, that's going to stretch out. I'm going to need scrolling. It's probably not going to be awesome, and that's really just my fault because I'm sitting there trying to use up all this space. Right. Well, the biggest thing to me is how many steps, because I want to be able to do the chart in as few steps as possible. So Power BI is awesome and there's a place for it. But I don't want to spend 20 minutes to go off and do a chart. I really don't want to do that. I want to be able to use charts frequently and quickly. I want to build them fast. So I don't want to do it just in that special situation where Joe Manager says, I need trending charts for this list. I want to be nimble enough as a developer that I know how to kick that out quickly. And it's like this nice value add where within a few minutes, I can copy and paste some code and swap in some columns and like, boom, there's a chart with that. I want to be able to do it fast and that kind of thing. So to me, like when you think of the value part of it, that's the value to me is simplifying and doing that really quick. I'm not likely to want to do that longer process. So I'm just skipping charts over and over again with all these different solutions or project tracking. If I've got a go-to option where I can get a chart attached to that within a couple minutes, guess what? I'm going to start doing that all the time. And people are going to be like, whoa, cool. I didn't know SharePoint could do that. You know, I'm going to start putting them out there all the time. And it's your toolbox. So, you know, for me going forward, I mean, that's a reference that'll be there for years. And if I ever have somebody ask me to build something, I'm going to do it in my sandbox first. And I'm never going to really have to code things up from scratch per se, right? Anything anyone's going to describe in some way, it's probably similar to that example. So, oh my God, I've run way, way, way over. Okay. Anyways, I love this stuff. Hopefully you can tell. So yeah. Okay.
So that was awesome. We had a bunch of questions about the links to the stuff. We're going to host that in our internal Yammer group. You can email us at info@ksug.org, and we'll get your email address and add you from there. info@ksug.org. Once again, that's info@ksug.org. Just at ksug. CASUG. CASUG. Yeah, CASUG.org. So email us there. We'll add you into the Yammer group, and we'll post the recording. We'll post the samples, and we will post the PowerPoint in there for anybody that's interested. We've got on Meetup our February meeting already, Microsoft Teams. That one's going to be a lot of fun, so be sure to check that out. And as soon as we get a confirmation on a venue and a date, we will announce SharePoint Saturday for 2020. And we're also going to push out a survey just to get some feedback from all of you. So big round of applause to Will. Thank you. That was really awesome. Thank you all for being here. We'll stick around for a few more minutes for any follow-up questions, but otherwise, happy 2020. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks for sticking around too. I didn't mean to drag you guys in forever, but appreciate your. Thank you. Have a good night. Thank you.